But when we think about innovative leaders in the NGO space, people who have really figured out how to create partnerships with the corporate world and how to affect social change on a wide scale, I think you can say that Michael Brown clearly is an innovative leader. We're delighted that he's here today. The MBA program, Net Impact, and the Segal Fellows program, with Susie here running the program. We're so thankful that you are here helping us to pull this together and for sponsoring our luncheon as well.
Thank you.
Without further ado, please welcome Michael Brown.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and to be back at Brandeis. I love this campus, and I love that all three elements of this group that I've involved over the years are all coming together. I appreciate that you're drilling down on triple bottom lines, and you've read some of the background on the city year and our role in the private sector. What I thought I would do is just sort of start with where we were on this, 30 years ago. Starting July 1st will be our 30th anniversary. So getting where the years have gone, but looking backwards a little bit to look forwards. When we were, I started City Year because I took a year off in college. I went to Washington, D.C., where I worked for a congressman named Leon Panetta, who I'm sure you've heard of now, has done many things since being a member of Congress, but at the time he represented 200 miles of beautiful coastline in California, San Luis Obispo, from El by the Sea, the 17-mile drive. Perhaps some of you are from there or have been there. And I always tease Leon that no one wanted to leave there to join him in Washington to represent their interests because it was just so pretty. So we had people like me from Boston. I grew up in this area, and I spent a year when I was 20 years old working for him. He had legislation that, and I don't know if any one of you have had this experience, where the first time you got exposed to an idea, you just knew it would change your life forever. It was just that powerful. So the idea was voluntary national service, calling on Americans when they're young to give a year or two of service in a voluntary manner, on a full-time basis, and all the things it could do for our country, our communities, and to the young people who serve. It could be a multi-billion-dollar service resource for the country. It could make young people experts in what society needs and turn on their justice nerve, create a whole cohort of citizens that were active and knowledgeable. It even, the ideas that I got exposed to, it can even move the American Civil Rights Movement forward by uniting people of all backgrounds to serve together and to build common trust, because there's precious few places in our society where people of different backgrounds actually come together as equals to build common ground together. So the idea is that we could unite with people from all backgrounds when they're young, but they could create bonds and trust that could actually be a form of social, political, and cultural capital and economic capital for generations to come. And if that wasn't enough, you could also provide life-changing benefits like the GI Bill, which is arguably the most successful social program this society has ever had. And I'm sure if we actually drill down to all of our backgrounds, perhaps in some of you yourselves or your family's life prospects have been changed by the GI Bill and the ability to go to college or to graduate school through it. So if there was, the idea was that if you could do that through a domestic service opportunity as well. And so I got completely inspired by this idea when I was 20 years old. And then with my college roommate, Alan Casey, after returning to college and then law school, and we decided that we would start City Year as what we call an action tank. It's a term that we coined to mean something that was both a program and a think tank and something that's working on a big change idea. And the action tank is always asking the question, what's in the way today of moving the big idea forward? So the big idea that we cared about was that one day the most commonly asked question of a young person should be, where would you give your year or two of service? And all that would mean, whether it was the military, Teach for America, City Year, you name it, and all the things that we do for the country if that were the case. And we decided the first thing was that the idea is just so big, it would involve millions of Americans, that you wouldn't just legislate it, you had to demonstrate it. So we decided to start City Year as a demonstration of it and begin to answer questions like, would young people want to serve? What could they do effectively? How would you pay for it? So we set up City Year as a demonstration. We named it City Year because just like young people do junior year or senior year, we could do a city year, or a citizenship year, and it could sort of fit right in to youth development. We decided to start it entirely privately, and this is where this triple bottom line comes in mind, for a few reasons. One, there was no government money for what we were trying to do. There was no pool of money that you could apply for and say, this is for the ideas that you have. So we wanted the government to actually invest in these ideas, but we basically figured you had to build a better mousetrap, if you will, and then get people to come visit it. So we started City Year largely as a policy play, as a way of demonstrating that young people would want to serve, they could do meaningful things, there's an effective way to pay for it, that it could be community-based, and also have a national impact. So, and we were also inspired, I'm going back 30 years, and you know, the Winter Olympics just ended yesterday. We saw the Olympics of 1984, I'm talking about 1988, we're a few years away from the 84 Olympics in Los Angeles. And before those Olympics in Los Angeles, the Olympics largely lost money, almost bankrupted the city of Montreal, Mexico City. They were seen as big public events. And then Peter Uberoth took over the Olympics in '88, and he brought in the private sector. Now, I think we can all look at what the private sector's done with the Olympics and say, well, is it too much? We can, you know, the Coca-Cola this or you name it. On the other hand, by bringing the private sector in, it largely saved the only platform the world has to bring together nations in a peaceful way for like 2 weeks now, you know, biennially between the Summer and Winter Olympics. It's extraordinary the role the private sector has played in the Olympic movement. And I think it wouldn't be too strong a statement to say we wouldn't have an Olympic movement without the private sector. It's a sort of a triumph of bringing people together. And so we saw that and said, well, if you can have the corporation sponsor the Olympic, why not sponsor a youth corps? Why not sponsor a team in service? Also, we thought that the private sector would understand entrepreneurship and give us the flexibility to test the model. We were also trying to bring city kids and suburban kids together. So were we going to go to a mayor and say, this is all for you, when you'd also be supporting suburban kids? So there was almost no political entity to go for, so we went to the private sector. We also believe that there was a lot of idealism in the private sector and a lot of folks in companies that in themselves come out of the 60s and 70s and, you know, wanted to test some ideas. So we went around and we asked companies to sponsor a team of young people for our pilot program. We were running a 10-week pilot in '88, and it was already like now, February, March. We started to do something that I don't recommend as a social entrepreneur, maybe. We started to recruit our core before we had the money for it. Because it was March, February, March, we're like, hey, what could you be doing next summer? You could be doing a summer of service, because that's what we started our pilot with. And we knew that if we didn't reach out to young people, we weren't gonna have a core no matter what. So at the same time we're doing that, we're meeting with companies. And we would try to get a meeting with anyone that would meet with us. The goal of most meetings was to get another meeting. Somebody that could get us in front of a decision maker. And one of the people that I was starting City Year with, named Neil Silverstein, he would put his finger in the air after each meeting, kind of test the wind, and say, I think we're 7 handshakes away from money. I think we're 6 handshakes away. It just felt like, okay, someone's saying, well, because people would meet with us and say, I think you should meet so-and-so. And the question is, would they use their own capital to say, I'll call them, I'll connect you. This is even well before the internet. And we had both graduated law school, a couple of us graduated business school, but we had never really done anything yet. So people were taking risks on a few 25-year-olds, 26-year-olds. So finally, we would meet with these people in the companies, and we'd make our pitch, and they would all say the same thing. Who's already supporting you? And I get that, because they didn't want to be the first one to give us a big sponsorship and then have it not get off the ground, and then they're kind of stuck pulling the bag. So I would always say, well, if you supported us, then they'll support us, you know. So nobody said no, and nobody said yes. So what we did is we started to get these amazing applications from young people who said they wanted to do this at the time for $60 a week for a summer, full-time, incredibly diverse. And we asked them questions like, who are your heroes, and why do you want to serve your community? And what are the 3 biggest problems facing Boston or your community? Because we were local there. And it was powerful that young people just raised their hand and said they wanted to do this.
So we photocopied the applications, and at every meeting we left behind the applications, said, could you leaf through these? And it was literally the young people who were raising their hand to say they would do this that got us our first team sponsorship from what was then Bank of Boston, now Bank of America. You know, it's absolutely, they even said that, and our core theory was just release these young people to their idealism. They're willing to do this full time for $60 a week. Let's go test this together. And I've never forgotten that. And I tell this story all the time, not even just when we talk about the private sector, but every good thing that's ever happened to City Year is because some young person has taken a risk, convinced somebody, stepped forward, done something powerful. A few years later, it was 5 City Year core members that met with Bill Clinton when he was governor of Arkansas. And he said many times that his conversation with those 5 core members inspired him to create AmeriCorps. And I know we got AmeriCorps alums in the room. We've got fabulous Peace Corps, Vista, any other service corps? Peace Corps, fabulous. Military service? Sorry? Spouse, fabulous. So my point here is that it's the young people that put it forward, and ultimately the private sector got us started, and then everybody else started to say yes. One more private sector story. After we did the pilot program, we needed to raise, for the pilot program, we needed to raise $200,000, which is a lot of money when you hadn't raised anything, and you're 26 years old, and it's 1988. For the full year program, we needed to raise $1 million. And we basically shut down for a year to raise the money and recruit a core for a full year program. It was called City Year, after all. So the idea was to call young people for a year. And we had almost no money anymore. We successfully did the pilot. We went back and asked the companies that had each given us $25,000 to give us $100,000. And 4 of them had given us 25. So we went and said, that was successful. We're ready to do the full year program. Would you give us 100? And guess what? Nobody said no, and nobody said yes. They all said, keep in touch. Is anybody doing this? So then we went to New York. We were invited to meet with a guy named Ed Cohen at General Atlantic Partners. General Atlantic Partners still exists. It is a private equity firm in New York City. And in those days, before the internet, schools like the Heller School, Harvard Business School, the places, they put together booklets of everybody's resume that you could leaf through and maybe hire people if you wanted to be hired in New York. And he was leafing through and he found Jennifer Riley had been somebody who had started City Year with us. Called her, she called us, we went and visited with them. He said, we sat with him and we told our story about why we cared about national service, why it would change the country, all the way up to the 4 companies that we had asked for $100,000 and nobody said no, and then we said yes. So then he said, wait a minute. And he brought 4 partners into the room. He said, tell your story again, only quicker. So we told our story again. Then he asked us to leave the room. Then 10 minutes later, he called us in the room and says, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna give you a $100,000 challenge grant, good against 3 of those companies coming back with $100,000 in the next 90 days. No one had ever given us $100,000 before. The biggest gift to us was 25. It was extraordinary. We had just met these people. But he said, this is a classic equity play. I'm seeing value here. I'm seeing a market. Nobody wants to go first. So we're going to show you that you can pool this capital. Within a month, all 4 came back. So we had their 400,000. We had General Atlantic Partners. We had $500,000. And we were on our way to the full year program. So I wanted to share that one too, as a way of the private equity concepts and challenge grants and that kind of thinking got us started for the full year program. A couple more thoughts, and I want to open it up for anything you want to talk about with the private sector and City Year, or anything with City Year, is that we never thought about like, well, how do you go get a check from the private sector? It was never about just asking them for money. It was always about asking them to be partners, asking them to be involved. We always felt that there was a role for the private sector to play, and frankly, we thought that by engaging in this kind of work, it could actually influence the values of the private sector, and it could let them demonstrate their civic values. When I meet with corporate leaders now, I basically study up on them, but I also say, we want to help you express your civic values in the world. So let's talk about how we can do it. We've looked at your company, we think that we can do this or that, but you tell us, How are you trying to do it? Sometimes it's their brand, but oftentimes it's their employees. And I run a larger organization today, and I realize, of course, so many people got involved with us early in the private sector because they wanted their employees involved. They wanted to show that they cared, and they did, and find ways to volunteer and get involved, especially with the younger workforce. So it's always the case to ask for involvement. And you've read about Jeff Swartz. He got involved with us early. We met with him. We asked for boots. He gave us the boots. We met with him again. He says, why don't we get involved together? You've read, I think, some of the background. He said, my father built a boot. My grandfather built a boot. My father built a brand. And I want to build beliefs into this company, boots, brands, and beliefs. And we decided together that we would be a belief partner for him. And that is a authentic concept, an organization that they would work with to express their values. And so they began to give us thousands of boots, and we would do community service days. We would send people to be trained. They gave us all kinds of access to ways in which they ran their business. They would, because they were out of New Hampshire, and every candidate would come through for president, they would open up forums and bring us to them and say, well, we partner with Cityr. If you're going to come to Timberland, you have to talk to Cityr about investing in service. So it was like this full corporate total commitment to us. It's just absolutely remarkable experience with Jeff. And I think it just shows remarkably, and I think people did want to work at Timberland and be involved with it because of this partnership. And it lasted for many, many years until Timberland was bought, company was sold. We still have a small partnership with them, but it's different today than when it was more of a family-led company, even though it was publicly traded. So with that, let's open it up. What do you want to talk about?
I'll
Yes.
throw out a question just on the last point that you made about, we just finished discussing a case about Timberland, and I'm curious, how was the decision made to go knock on that door to ask for a partnership there? Out of all the people you could have called and asked?
Yeah, so the credit goes, you know, I'm going to take you up 30,000 feet, is one of the ideas of national service is, as I said earlier, it would bring together people who would know each other, form commitments together, and be able to work together the rest of your lives. But without that, who do we know? We know the people we grew up with, and in this case, somebody I went to summer camp with. Okay, I went to a Jewish summer camp, Camp Tevye. Any Camp Tevye here? Eli and Bessie Cohen Foundation? Okay, I went to Camp Tevye. And there was a woman, Lonnie Tanner, who was at camp with us. And as I became a counselor and she became a counselor, she was hired eventually to do one play. She did like 5 of them. She's one of those people that just gets like everything done. And when we were starting Cityr, Alan and I made a list of people that we wanted to get involved in starting this. Names of people we just knew we were extraordinary. And these are the people we knew. We reached out to Lonnie. Turns out Lonnie loves to get things donated. So she volunteered with us for the first 6, 8, 9 months, lived on a couch in our apartment, and cold called people. She cold called Timberland. Got somebody on the phone, wouldn't take no for an answer. She's a person that didn't mind rejection in this, and literally just cold called until they said, okay, got to the right person, and they sent 50 beautiful Timberland boots. And the next year we needed 75. We're like, oh my goodness, we need 75. She got 75. And then we realized we should go meet these people, which is what we ended up doing. I met with Jeff. So that's where, but I did want to share that, like, it's kind of who you know, and that's one of the beautiful things that I think national service can do for this country, is create more people who do know each other and can build commitments beyond my summer camp network. It was a good one. But we should be broader, right? Yes?
So I know Cityr has really expanded a lot over the time that you've been there. I'm just curious if you can talk a little bit about where you see like the future direction and where it's going.
Yeah, so we started Cityr in the beginning to demonstrate that national service could sort of do anything. We knew we didn't want to focus on any particular thing for 2 reasons. One, we weren't experts on anything. So we weren't going to say, we're going to just do this or we're going to do that. And two, the expertise that we wanted to show was that we could unite young people and that they could do these things because we wanted to demonstrate as a matter of public policy that young people could add value to almost anything. So the metaphor we used was we wanted to be the yeast and the bread of other nonprofits. So whatever else a nonprofit was doing, they could utilize young people to do more of it. And young people, frankly, with their fresh ideas, this is always the theory of national service, could bring new ideas and new approaches into the nonprofit sector. So we did not focus. So for the first, 18 years or so, we did anything people asked us to do for a day, a week, a month, or a year. We were a general service corps. The good news on that is you don't get bored, you learn new things. The bad news is you don't focus, nothing aggregates, you're not necessarily relevant all the time, and sometimes our core members had downtime or were bored if a project wasn't a great project. And if there was one that was great, did it replicate? About 12 years ago, we stepped back, we asked a different question. How can we have more impact? There was AmeriCorps now. We didn't have to show that national service could do everything. There's lots of organizations now. Why don't we focus? We were being drawn into schools. 12 years ago, 75% of our teams were serving in schools, but they were decisions being made locally by local directors of city or programs, not by us nationally. So we said, that's interesting. Why do schools want us? And we studied it. And we found some really cool things, that we were extending the day, that we were providing social, emotional, and academic supports. And we found some things that weren't so great, like we were wiping down whiteboards and moving chairs around in places where it didn't really know how to utilize us. At the same time, we began to ask professors in schools of education, what are you learning about what young people could do? One person from University of Pennsylvania in particular, Mike Knuckler, said, you guys are natural mentors. And the term, he said, is a scientific term. A natural mentor is not someone who comes every Thursday at 2 o'clock, but someone in your life who has a mentoring relationship with you that does certain things. And it's sort of authentic, but not structured. But you have this ability, this secret sauce of like having young adults who can connect. If you can marry that to evidence-based practices and research-based metrics, you can actually utilize that. Johns Hopkins University and the University of Chicago did a series of studies about 10 years ago that found that at that time over 1 million students were dropping out of school in America. The reason why that was so important, obviously not only is that a crisis, but there's 17,000 school districts in this country. Other countries often have one school district. We have 17,000. Everything's local, right? And there's a strength in that. But it means that it's really hard to normalize the data. Who's dropping out? Why? They did this incredible set of studies. They found 1 million students are dropping out. They also found that you can identify who's likely to drop out by early warning indicators. High absences, poor behaviors, or course failure, getting an F or math or English. 4 indicators. If you have one of those indicators and you're in the 6th grade and you're in a high poverty school district, which is to say almost any urban district has a higher poverty quotient, you have less than a 20% chance of graduating 6 years later with your class. It's a long answer to your question, where we're going, but I want to tell you this part of the story. Who among us that have children, or would one day have children, would think that those are good odds, that your 6th grader has a 20% chance of graduating in 6 years? That is an abomination, and yet that's what's happening in many high poverty communities. So what we realized was that we could utilize young people to work on absences, behaviors, and course performance. That high poverty schools simply don't have enough human capital in the building. That one teacher in front of 25 to 35 students will never be able to have enough resources to be able to connect with the students of where they're needed, with regards to the students that are behind by several years sometimes, the students that are absent, suspended, that need extra supports. So what we realized is that national service, if executed with evidence-based practices on these research-based metrics, could help provide schools with the extra supports that they need, that research says could actually move more young students, more students on track. The Philadelphia Education Fund did a study, just like I told you. It mapped absences, behaviors, and course performance against every single student who, from the 6th grade to the 12th grade for 6 years. That should be a straight line. right? That's what the study should look like. 6 to 12, everybody should graduate. Instead, of course, it doesn't. About 50% were dropping out. And then when it color-coded that for the 4 indicators, it matched it completely. And ever since I saw that study, I really just felt viscerally that City Year core members could literally stand under that curve and hold it up and help students to walk across it. So we changed our entire platform, and we stopped doing all these other things, and we decided to go all in on absences, behaviors, course performance, full day in schools, greeting students 7, 8 in the morning, staying to the last student leaves the after school program, using social and emotional supports and academic supports to be supporting the whole school and the whole child. And 3 years ago, we decided to try to scale that to reach at least 50% of the students in every school that we're in, and to help ensure that 80% of the students in the schools we're in reach the 10th grade on time and on track. The average on-track performance in high poverty schools and the schools that we serve is around 44%, which means about 44% of the students don't have any early warning indicators, which track urban graduation rates of between 60 and 70%. So by our presence and practice, we've set a very big goal to try to basically double that. There's reasons why we didn't set it at 100%. There's things that we, as non-professionals, could never provide students. But there's many things that young adults can. All of which is to say, that's what we're doing now. We have a really big plan. We want to triple in size. We're currently serving 200,000 students. We want to serve 800,000. We're currently in 332 schools. We want to be in about 1,000 schools. We currently have 33,000 core members. We want to have about 10,000. And we're currently in 28 cities, and we want to be in 40 cities. And at that scale, we would be reaching 50% of all the students in the communities that are producing 2/3 of the urban dropouts, and hopefully increasing their on-track performance by increasing our impacts and our time on task, our dosage. It's just lots of things that go into that, which is the reason why I'm still here after 30 years, because people often say to me, "You still there?" And I'm like, I feel like this is the good stuff. I really feel like after all these years, I get to work on, and the organization gets to work on. I've always been proud of the organization, proud to work with it and at it. But this work is particularly meaningful because I really feel that young people are uniquely, perhaps more qualified to connect with students in schools in a non-disciplinary way that could even help, help crack the school to prison pipeline, that can change the narrative in this country, that can provide students with the kind of mentoring that they need. And over time, thousands of young people who serve could actually change our way of thinking about how we make change in society and help to build, close the empathy gap in this country. So it's a long answer to your question. That's what we're working on. Yes.
I'm Kyle. So I did a year of AmeriCorps with the Student Conservation Association
Nice.
in Western Mass, and
That's
a
great.
year with Food Corps in Western.
Terrific.
So I love AmeriCorps, and thank you for
Thank you for your service. That's
thank you for
awesome.
everything you do. It's really incredible. I wanted to learn a little bit more about City Year's relationship with AmeriCorps and how that relationship kicked off.
Yeah.
And then I have a second question about you mentioned that City Year wages for service members started at $60.
Yes.
My wages for Western Mass were $65.
Yeah.
So I was wondering how City Year is addressing what's notoriously an underpaid serving population. Because I know personally, my corps, we felt like we were had a certain amount of ability to be there because we had our parents' support, because our wages were so low. And since the mission of AmeriCorps is to or the mission of City Year is to establish a dialogue between different people, wages definitely play. So I was wondering just if you could speak to that a little bit.
Sure. So on the first one, as I mentioned, we sort of started City Year as an action tank and kept talking to people about how we could get a federal commitment. Our first federal grant actually came from the George H.W. Bush administration. We worked with Senator Kennedy. Ted Kennedy was an extraordinary believer in this work. We worked with him on legislation back in 1990-91 under George H.W. Bush to create a bipartisan bill that we were part of promoting. that actually provided demonstration money for service organizations, and we were one of 7 organizations that received funding under this demonstration bill. So our first federal grant would allowed us to expand, it allowed us to go from Boston to Rhode Island and build some expansion. That was our first federal funding. And then Bill Clinton came to visit us as a candidate. We invited all the candidates to come to us. And his campaign called and said, can we come? We're like, yes. And he sat with 5 city or core members. And as I said, he said many times that his conversation, and in the context in this conversation is particularly important. Eli Segal ran Bill Clinton's campaign. And Eli didn't come that day, but Bill Clinton came. He spent about 2 hours with us talking with core members. And then that was in December of 1991, which was before the February New Hampshire primary of 92. And he was governor of Arkansas and one of a bunch of candidates, and not all that high up in the polls. He ended up coming in second in New Hampshire. Obviously, he went on to win the nomination and to win the presidency. And when we met him, he talked with us for a couple hours, and one of the core members ended up, Stephen Spalos, took his sweatshirt off and gave it to him and said, don't forget us, Governor Clinton. It wasn't part of any script or anything. He just gave it to him. And Bill Clinton took it and said, I won't forget you, Stephen. This has been very powerful. And then fast forward 11 months later, it was November, it was the day after Thanksgiving of 1992. So he's now president-elect of the United States, but he hasn't taken the oath of office yet. And he was jogging in DC in between policy meetings, and this new network called CNN is jogging behind him and capturing him, and he's wearing a City Year sweatshirt. And I'm like, I'm watching CNN, it's brand new, you should check it out, it's really good. Brand new network, it was like we were the first junkies on this. And I just couldn't believe it. And I reached for the phone to call Alan, and the phone's ringing. And I just say, I just pick it up and say, are you watching this? And he said, yeah, this changes everything. Bye. And Bill Clinton stopped. They put microphones in front of his face, and they said, President-elect Clinton, what are going to be your priorities as president? And he said, the national debt because it's too high, the economy because there's a recession, healthcare because not everybody has it, and national service for America's young people. It's like national service for America's young people. Only us national service geeks talk about that kind of stuff. That is not something, and he's wearing this. He was sending a message 11 months later. He had not worn this, we hadn't seen him, so he was sending a message. And within a month, Eli Segal volunteered to come up to City Year to meet with us to talk about forming something that became the Corporation for National Community Service and AmeriCorps. We didn't know what it'd be called. We were just consulting on it. And then a few months after that, we were at the White House for a bill signing ceremony, bipartisan bill. And then that allowed us to actually say yes to other communities that wanted to start City Year programs, because we had always said no to people that wanted to start City Year programs because we were broke. We couldn't even imagine starting a second program, but we always said, start anything, start. You can look at anything we've got. This is a movement. But we didn't know how to start a second City Year program. We barely knew how to keep this one alive, and we never had more than 2 months of money in the bank. But just to tell a quick story, there's a woman named Mary Louise Ramsdale who saw us in our second year doing calisthenics. She saw very diverse young people. She asked, what is this? Somebody explained. She met me and Alan. She said that she's from Columbia, South Carolina. She said they fly the Confederate flag over our state house. She's a Caucasian woman. She was horrified by this. And it literally was on the State House dome now. Years ago, it got moved to the side, State House dome. And she said, I want this program doing its calisthenics in front of that flag every single day to say, that is not the South, this is the South, and this is what I want to do. And we said, we don't know how to do that yet, but talk to people here. And then AmeriCorps passed, and because she had started to organize, we said yes. So our very first program outside of Boston was in Columbia, South Carolina. And I asked my parents, I said, we're going to start a second City Year program, and I'll give you 40 guesses what state it's in. And I was just having fun, but after North Carolina, on the 42nd guess, they said South Carolina, which is to say they didn't get it in 40 guesses. And my point is not to say anything about any particular state, but why would we go to any particular state or South Carolina being the first one? It was because Mary Louise Ramsdale, who was a 26-year-old law school student, wouldn't take no for an answer and said, I gotta have this. And it was really compelling, and it was to bring people of all backgrounds together. And AmeriCorps helped to say, I could say yes to it, because AmeriCorps creates a market, okay? And as you guys look at public policy, which I encourage you to do in this class, AmeriCorps creates a market. It doesn't pay for everything. When we were first starting City Year, I thought federal funding for this would look like the Peace Corps. If you join the Peace Corps, which is a beautiful thing, and it's on a great model too, you're a federal employee as you were for 2 years. And it's one model. And I thought that would be the case for the domestic version of this. But the domestic version turned out to be something different. It turned out to be a grants program, which is also very powerful, and probably a better way to do it for domestic service programs rather than many programs all over, international perhaps, which meant that lots of organizations could participate, and every funding had to be matched. Every 3 years you had to get, you had to show results. And governors had to be involved in the distribution of funding. And as I tell our Republican supporters, it's really built on Republican principles in many ways. Government that's close to the ground, it's not a big bureaucracy. So any case, this led to AmeriCorps. We were able to say yes. I didn't know that we'd be starting new City Year programs until Mary Louise. I thought we were a demonstration, and now we're in 28 cities. And there's no way we'd be there without AmeriCorps, which is currently 25% of our funding, not including the education awards, and you had access to 2 of them that can pay for your education or pay back loans. In terms of the stipend, the idea of national service has always been that it is a bit of a sacrifice, that it's not a job, that it's a service experience, and that the resources should be a stipend and a scholarship. And that was something that even before there was an AmeriCorps program, we gave scholarships, which we could barely afford, to demonstrate the policy idea of a stipend and a scholarship. And then AmeriCorps ended up going with that policy. So the idea of it is that you're actually getting not only the stipend, but you're getting the scholarship, and it's almost like you're saving it. So the compensation does have to be looked at together. And it should be high enough so that everyone should be able to do it without extraordinary distress or even distress, but low enough such that it's a sacrifice and more people can do it. And that line, I think, needs to be looked at constantly. The stipend used to be like 9,000, 10,000. For next year, the lowest AmeriCorps stipend, the most basic stipend that AmeriCorps says all over the country will be $14,000 or $14,100 plus nearly a $6,000 scholarship at the end. So that's $20,000 for 10 months of service. Is it enough? I don't know yet. And we are constantly studying it. We have 3,000 Corps members. Every time we increase the stipend by $1,000, it's $3 million. And we'll be increasing it for next year. Also, we've looked at the 6 cities that have the highest cost of living: San Jose, New York, Chicago, and we've increased it well beyond there to $18,000, $18,000. And we're going to keep looking at it because what you say is absolutely right. It has to be for everybody, and it shouldn't cause distress.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for 2 AmeriCorps programs. How are we doing? So we got about 10 more minutes, right? So I wanted to switch the conversation for a minute, if that's okay.